charging in, arms and legs pumping like a steam train.
War looking safe as the Bank of England, really.
Oh, that went like a bullet through extra cover.
And he's burned up ground to get to that. Magnificent catch.
An absolute blunder. He miffed it and muffed it and missed it. One has to say
You
it.
put it very nicely, Blurs.
Get a better view of the NatWest series on BBC Radio 4 198 Longwave.
Get your passport ready. Your numbers could be up. Tomorrow you could win a round-the-world trip. Then on Wednesday, the chance to swoop the holiday cash.
Join me, Philip Schofield, for the National Lottery winning lines with the National Lottery, Thunderball and Lottery Extra Draws Live.
Tomorrow, 7:30 on BBC One.
Now, good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
A rhythmic sound that pleases savages and children alike. It acts as a narcotic and makes them forget reality.
The soundtrack to love, war, the Great Depression, and a divided nation.
Jazz music is at the center of the American mythology.
BBC Two presents all the jazz greats in Ken Burns' highly acclaimed story of jazz, beginning tomorrow at 7:30.
The lunchtime news now on BBC One Scotland with George Alagaya and Sally Magnuson.
Labour wins an historic second term in office with a massive majority. Tony Blair says Britain has given him an instruction to deliver. William Hague resigns, saying it's vital for leaders to listen and parties to change. And the Lib Dems celebrate getting their highest ever number of MPs.
And in 30 minutes, the Scottish Tory chairman Raymond Robertson throws in the towel after another disastrous night for the Conservatives in Scotland. And celebrations for Labour as they hold on to all their Scottish seats.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC's news at 1 o'clock. The two faces of democracy, victory and defeat, are plain for all to see today. Tony Blair is already preparing to announce his new team after what he called a night of history for the Labour Party. William Hague, on the other hand, is headed for the backbenches. He's resigned as party leader after a campaign that saw the Tories with nothing to show for the last 4 years of opposition. That's in contrast to the Liberal Democrats. They now have more seats than at any time in their history. Here then is the story so far. Labour has won 413 seats, the Tories 165 and the Lib Dems 51. The other parties between them have 10 so far. That puts Labour on course for an overall majority of about 165. And if we look at the share of the vote, Labour got 42%, the Conservatives 33%, the Lib Dems 19%, though it's worth remembering that it was the lowest turnout since 1918. Well, let's get the details now from our correspondent John Sopel, who's in Downing Street. John.
George, thank you. That Tony Blair should find himself back in Downing Street probably comes as a surprise to few people. But that William Hague should resign so swiftly has come as a surprise. But perhaps having reflected on how badly he did last night, he concluded it was time to move on. William Hague emerged from central office after an emotional meeting with party workers. Some tried to persuade him to stay, but Mr. Hague's mind was made up.
We have not been able to persuade a majority, or anything approaching a majority in the country, that we are yet the alternative government that they need. Nor have I been able to persuade sufficient numbers that I am their alternative Prime Minister. I believe it's vital that the party be given the chance to choose a leader who can build on my work, but also take new initiatives and hopefully command a larger personal following in the country. And I've therefore decided to step down as leader of the Conservative Party when a successor can be elected in the coming months.
From vanquished to victor, Tony Blair made what now must be a familiar journey to Buckingham Palace. He spent a little under 45 minutes inside, then it was back to Downing Street to greet well-wishers, although it was all a bit more low-key than '97. He paid tribute to William Hague's stoicism and resilience.
Even though obviously I profoundly disagreed with many of the things he may have said during the course of this campaign, I thought he showed extraordinary stoicism and resilience in very difficult circumstances, and I said to him in the early hours of this morning, I wish him well, I wish him the very best of luck in the future.
And then set out his goals for a second term.
It has been a remarkable and historic victory for my party, but I am in no doubt at all as to what it means. It is a mandate for reform and for investment in the future, and it is also very clearly an instruction to deliver.
Then it was time for the family portrait outside number 10, though this time with a significant addition. Well, Tony Blair is now back inside working, reforming his government, and we'll expect details of that cabinet reshuffle later on today. But it all comes after a night of excruciating pain for the Conservatives and unbridled joy for Labour. 10 o'clock, the close of polls, and suddenly the pace becomes frenetic. Sunderland South brought a touch of it's a knockout to the democratic process as they raced to be first. It took just 41 minutes.
Christopher John Mullin, Labour Party, 19921.
This seat in 97, Birmingham Edgbaston, gave the first clue that the political landscape was being convulsed. Last night, a seat that the Tories had high hopes of winning back returned Labour with an even bigger share of the vote. It was clear now we were back in landslide territory, and so when Gordon Brown's result came through, the talk was of victory.
And I believe that the scale of our victory and the wide margin between ourselves and our opponents reflects not just that we have won the battle of votes, but we are winning the battle of ideas.
For one senior figure who'd had such an eventful campaign, even the traditional thank yous had added edge.
I'd like also to express my appreciation to the police, though for a number of reasons, perhaps I've every reason to be a little more this time.
Forget caution, forget taking nothing for granted, forget complacency. When Tony Blair arrived at his Sedgefield count, there was recognition this was uncharted territory. The first leader in the Labour Party's 100 years to lead them to a second full term. The hand of history was now truly on his shoulder.
"4 years ago, we were elected as a government amid some euphoria after 18 years of Conservative government. The judgment may be a more sober one and the mood is different, but I believe it is a more reasoned judgment as well, because it is based on a record in office."
As the Blair family gathered, there was unalloyed joy. But elsewhere, Labour politicians who'd been in a few scrapes were pulling through. Keith Vaz survived. Who knows, though, about his ministerial career? So did the former Tory Sean Woodward, who'd been parachuted into the safe Labour seat of St Helens, while Peter Mandelson still seemed to have a few demons to slay.
They underestimated Hartlepool, and they underestimated me because I am a fighter and not a quitter.
The Tories aren't quitters either, but last night the British people quit them again. In counts, in constituency clubs, the nightmare of 97 returned. There were occasional shards of light, though, for the Conservatives.
The Conservative Party candidate, 15,410.
Again here in Upminster in Essex. And the Tories are back in Scotland. Admittedly, only one seat, but it is a toehold. This game was at the expense of the Scottish Nationalists, amazingly the only seat to change hands in Scotland all night. And that, of course, meant there was no return to Westminster for Malcolm Rifkind.
I said 4 years ago that the Labour Party should consider they had a leasehold, not a freehold, of this constituency. And indeed, that is what it is, but the lease is lasting slightly longer than I would have preferred.
Mr. Hay, do you intend to continue as party leader?
Comment later, thank you very much.
And that delay in recovery, despite the brave faces, was to prove a mortal blow to the Tory leader, a hint of which came in his speech.
There is no doubt that the results tonight across the country are deeply disappointing for my party. And I feel for the candidates and the activists and supporters in other constituencies who have worked so hard for so little reward this evening.
William Hague had sought to turn this election into a referendum on the euro, an attempt to tap into the Euroscepticism of the British people. Ironically, the party which gained most last night were the pro-European Liberal Democrats. They held on to seats that they thought would be unholdable, like here in Torbay, and gained in places once considered unwinnable. Tony Benn's old seat in Chesterfield, for example. Charles Kennedy, occasionally written off as lightweight, was walking tall.
We have, in all likelihood, built on the amazing breakthroughs of 4 years ago, and we've taken ourselves further forward across Britain as a whole, and we are very much the party of the future for British politics.
Thank you. But as Tony Blair flew back to London to commence his second term, there was plenty to cause the Prime Minister pause for thought. Democracy had thrown up grit. Here in Oldham, after the race riots, the neo-fascist British National Party polled a staggering 5,000 votes. Candidates on the platform weren't allowed to speak for fear of stirring up more trouble. Perhaps the most remarkable story of the night came in Wyre Forest, where a retired consultant, protesting about a hospital closure in Kidderminster, wiped the floor with the Labour Party and everybody else for that matter.
And the way I view this is a tremendous reaction from the people against a very powerful government, against a very powerful political system that overrides the will of the people.
Perhaps most worrying of all for those who seek to govern was the apparent indifference of those they seek to represent. Turnout slumped dramatically. This is a challenge for all democratic politicians. Yes, 2001 will be remembered as Tony Blair's second landslide. But it will also go down as the election where the voters stayed away. And so there has been no triumphalism here in Downing Street today. As Tony Blair has said, the mood is much more sober. Now he has to deliver. George.
John, thank you very much. So let's take a more detailed look now at how we voted. Peter Snow is in the BBC's election studio with all his computer wizardry. Peter.
An extraordinary, almost a total repeat of the last historic landslide for Labour. Look at the scoreboard. Labour down just 6 on that amazing score last time. The Tories exactly where they were, and the Lib Dems the only ones moving up by 7. There is the map. Now you may think there's not much Labour on that map, not much red on that map. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put all the little seats into the same size discs, and you will see now actually how powerful Labour is. Look at that. That's London. Look at all those red discs there. Each one of these a seat. You can see now how totally Labour dominates the country. A tremendous Labour landslide. The first time Labour has gained a second term with a likely full term, and with that huge majority as well. Here's William Hague. The challenge for him was to turn all these seats from red and gold and yellow and so on to blue if he was to get anywhere near winning the power to get into number 10 again. What actually happened, as you can see here, is he won about 4 or 5 of them. Very little happened up here at the top of the steps, as you can see, and he was left, when the stairs go back again, he was left having lost some seats to the Liberal Democrats with a net gain of, let's just put the stairs back in front of William Hague again, there he is, a net gain of none, no seats at all gained, so actually he's got just as far to go next time. What a devastating result for the Conservatives. Actually can't even get onto the first stair. He needs 165 next time in the next election. So his successor needs that. Now, this is the picture from Scotland. Very quickly, the changes in Scotland. As you can see here, Labour down, the SNP down, a poor result for the SNP. Only the Liberal Democrats are ahead in Scotland. In Wales, the picture is that there's been quite a bit of change here. Labour down, Plaid Cymru up a little bit. But what happened there was that the Labour Party took Inishmon and Plaid Cymru took Carmarthen East and Deliver. So it was sort of swap. But otherwise, no change in Wales. And again, no sign of the Tories coming in there at all. And the final picture I want to show you here very quickly is the share of the vote. All over Britain, The result was 42% of the share of the vote for Labour, 33% the Conservatives, 19% the Liberal Democrats. And when you look at that as a share of the electorate, here's the share of the electorate now, share of all those who could have voted. Labour get 25% of all those who could have voted, 19% the Conservatives, 11% the Liberal Democrats, 6% the others, and as a share of all those eligible to vote, look at the share of the non-voters, way up at 41%, far bigger than Labour's victory.
Peter, thank you very much. Well done. For the man who's dreamed of walking through the door of number 10 since he was a teenager, last night was a desperate blow, politically and personally. William Hague's dramatic resignation triggers a leadership battle that's bound to reopen some of the old conflicts within his party. Here's Laura Trevelyan on the Tory party in the aftermath of defeat.
An emotional reception from party workers for William and Fiona Hague as they arrived at Conservative Central Office shortly before 7 o'clock this morning. Those who had given their all for Mr Hague over the past month turned out to greet their defeated leader. His mind was already made up, his resignation speech drafted, as he thanked his loyal staff for their efforts, which had turned out to be in vain. The atmosphere here at Conservative Central Office is like the aftermath of a major accident. Staff are in a state of shock and disbelief. Yet one of Mr Hague's aides guessed what might be coming at the end of last week, when he sensed that Mr Hague knew his strategy wasn't working.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Throughout the campaign, Mr Hague concentrated on tax cuts, being tough on asylum seekers who weren't genuine, and above all, keeping the pound.
Here it is. This is what is at stake in this election. And it really is at stake in this election.
Mounting internal criticism of the strategy meant Mr Hague had to jump before he was pushed.
They got painted into an extremist position. The language of the European debate, the 8 or 20 billion pounds worth of tax cuts, the whole issue of asylum seekers and law and order, the foreign land speech, all added up to an image of a right-wing xenophobic party talking to itself in a very introspective way.
What I'm not going to do is join in the weekend's analysis. I'm afraid we've got 4 or 5 years to reflect, and I'm going to spend this weekend reflecting before I give any more considered remarks.
It's a brutal end to Mr Hague's leadership, which began 4 years ago with an endorsement from Lady Thatcher. He inherited a party divided over Europe and papered over the cracks by toughening the stance against the single European currency. Success in the local and European elections followed, yet his vision of a more inclusive party never materialised.
They want to be free.
This enduring image of the teenage Mr Hague addressing the Tory party conference may not have helped endear him to the public.
I think William Hague has done a great deal for the party in an organisational sense and a financial sense to restructure it. What he hasn't been able to do in the 4 years that he's been leader is to give it a new intellectual focus, a new vision. That's what his successor is going to apply his talents to, has to apply his or her talents to.
What went wrong? I think that probably what went wrong was that perhaps even since the fall of Thatcher, we failed as a party properly to come to terms with who we are and what we think in a post-communist world in which the Labour Party has changed and in which there is much more consensus about economics. So I think as a party we've had quite a long-term identity crisis.
5-4 on. Michael Portillo to be the next Tory leader. Ian Duncan Smith subject to...
Outside Tory headquarters this morning, the bookmakers were queuing up to offer odds on Mr Hague's successor, the leader who'll finally have to resolve the party's identity crisis. Laura Trevelyan, BBC News at Conservative Central Office.
The process of choosing a new Conservative leader starts almost straight away. No dates are yet certain, but nominations are likely to close by July the 5th. MPs are then balloted to find the 2 most popular candidates. The final ballot of MPs is likely to be on July the 17th. A ballot of all party members to choose between the 2 candidates is then held as soon as practicable. And we think that could mean the new leader will be known in the first few weeks of August. The bookies' favourite is the Shadow Chancellor, Michael Portillo. As we've heard, the Shadow Home Secretary, Anne Widdecombe, has ruled nothing out. Lesser-known figures include Ian Duncan Smith, the Shadow Defence Secretary, and David Davis, Chairman of the Commons Public Accounts Committee. And no one's ruling out Kenneth Clarke, the former Chancellor. Now, let's get the latest from Laura Trevelyan, who's at Conservative Party headquarters. Laura, given what's happened, given the rout, are any of those people actually going to want this job?
Well, that is the question at Conservative Central Office. One of Michael Portillo's advisers said to me this morning, is Michael really going to want to inherit this mess? Nobody really knows the answer to that question. Also with Michael Portillo, there's the fact that his private life would be scrutinised by the newspapers. He admitted to having had homosexual experiences in the past. The Sunday papers really went through his private life with a tooth comb. He would have to endure that again. And would that really be worth it to lead a party that probably has even more soul searching to do? These are all questions that people just don't know the answer to at the moment. Anne Widdecombe, the Shadow Home Secretary, she was coming out of Conservative Central Office this morning. She was asked about her intentions. She said, all things decently and in good time. I mean, the feeling you get at the moment is that the party is in trauma, is trying to observe a decent period of mourning before it really makes up its mind. Kenneth Clarke, there's talk that perhaps he might do a deal with Michael Portillo, making Michael Portillo the successor. But really the great unknown is that perhaps it will be one of the much younger members of the party who will throw their hat into the ring. People talk maybe about Liam Fox, about Andrew Lansley, about people like that, people the public doesn't know about probably,
Laura,
but that's what's needed.
Laura, sorry to interrupt you there. You talked about a party in trauma. Briefly, do you think they have any idea what went wrong?
Not really. I think, there was such tunnel vision at Conservative Central Office. They were fixated on talking about keeping the pound, about talking about asylum seekers. This was a strategy they were convinced would bring back their core vote, and it didn't. Lady Thatcher spoke for many Tories when she said just a few minutes ago, we're very disappointed. William worked tirelessly, and now the Conservative Party will be back, she said. But what they need to do now is to chart that course back.
Laura, thank you very much. So, would another Tory leader have made any difference? The constituency of Northampton South is part of the so-called Northampton Triangle, where three constituencies, Northampton South, Kettering and Wellingborough, were among Labour's 5 most vulnerable seats. Labour held on to all three, but only narrowly. Our correspondent, Richard Bilton, is there. Richard.
George, as you say, yeah, this was a crucial area for them. They had high hopes for those three marginals, but as we know, they were beaten in each with actually a slightly larger majority from the Labour Party. So what do the people who live here, who were targeted by the Conservatives and their policies, think of William Hague and what's happened to him?
Market Day is a busy day in this county town. Many of the voters the Conservatives had hoped to win back were out early this morning. There was little surprise amongst those buying and selling that William Hague had resigned.
I think he's probably made the right decision because he wasn't going to get anywhere where he was, I don't think. Now he hasn't won the general election. He's got to do something, move on.
I'm not surprised. I think, to be fair to them, it gives them a chance to get themselves sorted out fairly quickly.
Party leaders should be strong and defying and, they should know what they're doing, not 1 minute this and next minute that.
Shoppers arriving at the local supermarket can't miss Labour's win. But this is a place with a Conservative history, where the economy is strong and most people own their own homes. Would this area have backed the Conservatives if the leader had been different?
They're not like they used to be, the Conservatives. I voted for them last time, but I wouldn't imagine there's anyone else who could do the job better than him.
Yes, but I can't tell you who. No.
I think they should have gone with other policies other than Europe. I think, we should have heard more about the health and police and just about everything else.
This is an area where the Conservatives have failed on all their targets. The challenge for the Tories now is to find a leader and policies that sell well in these key marginals.
Now, on a night of a bad turnout, actually the turnout here wasn't so bad, but interestingly, I've spoken to lots of people today who said that they didn't vote because they didn't want to vote for the Labour Party, but they didn't see William Hague and the Conservatives as a realistic opposition. George.
Richard, thank you. The Liberal Democrats have kept up their winning streak through the morning. They've now won 51 seats. Charles Kennedy said the party had showed it could win seats against the odds, against the tide. Our political correspondent, Carol Walker, is outside the party headquarters. Carol, I suppose it could be argued that this is a personal triumph for Charles Kennedy himself.
I think it is, in a sense that the voters clearly took to his rather more laid-back, more open and more direct style. But I think the party also benefited from the fact that it was seen to be, if you like, somewhat above the fray, while the Tories and Labour were really slugging it out, and the Liberal Democrats were able to stand above that somewhat. And I think that was certainly appealing to voters. I think they also picked up protest votes, both from voters who felt that they weren't getting the sort of results they'd been expecting from the Labour government, and they weren't attracted at all to William Hague's Conservatives.
Carol, do you think these 51 seats for the Liberals, does this change British politics and nature of British politics at all?
Well, it's interesting what we're hearing from Charles Kennedy and from his strategists here in Cowley Street, is that they think that they can actually now fulfil the sort of ambition which Charles Kennedy was talking about during the campaign of becoming the most effective opposition in the Commons. They may not have as many seats as the Conservatives, but they think they can actually do better than the Conservatives, especially looking at the Tories are going to spend the next couple of months or so utterly preoccupied with this leadership contest, and they think that in the meantime the Liberal Democrats are going to be the ones that can hold the Labour government to account.
Carol, thank you. The former boyfriend of the Olympic athlete Asher Hansen has been jailed for 2 years for staging an attack on himself, claiming he'd been the victim of a racist assault. Chris Cotter stabbed himself in the back and slashed his forehead in the hope that it would rekindle his relationship with the athlete. 2 other men were also found guilty of perverting the course of justice. The father who admitted killing his suicidally depressed daughter has been given a suspended prison sentence. James Lawson suffocated his daughter after she asked him to help her commit suicide. The judge said society couldn't condone what he'd done, even if it could understand. In Japan, 8 school children have been killed in a knife attack at their primary school in Osaka. The knifeman ran amok as classes began, injuring several teachers and pupils. 6 children are still in hospital in a serious condition. Police are questioning a man they arrested at the scene. Back now to the election. This morning, Tony Blair has talked about voters giving his government a mandate for reform. So, what are the key areas he's going to have to tackle? Our correspondent, John Pienaar, has been looking at the challenges.
Time's running short and services like health need to respond urgently to the Blair treatment. Changing the traditional face of services like the NHS will decide whether Labour succeeds or fails in its second term. But the Blair diagnosis is for more private sector involvement, whether professionals and unions like it or not, and many don't.
It isn't a simple solution to say private sector investment will necessarily lead to improvement, and the state of the British Railways is a very good example of that. There has been private sector investment, and it isn't obvious that the services have improved.
Another defining Labour challenge to decide, will Britain join the euro or keep the pound? The city, like everyone else, has been anticipating today's election results. Now it's come, some believe all that's lacking is political will.
I think with the election out of the way, the economic conditions have essentially been met for EMU entry. What needs to be done now is to make a political decision and to build public support for a move. It's unlikely to happen very soon, but clearly the conditions are in place economically to make a decision.
And the market a bit jittery because something could happen at any time.
Yeah, the markets clearly are very jittery of an early announcement of a referendum date.
The issue of constitutional reform may help answer the question, is Tony Blair serious about being radical? Not everyone's convinced. Reformers are refusing to take Tony Blair at his word. Not about a more democratic Lords and not about a new voting system.
What I fear is that this Labour government, as with every government, will rather enjoy the power that it has at the centre and will shy away from those reforms which might make its life rather harder.
Tony Blair can't please everyone, and he won't. He'll be accused of being too radical about changing public services, not radical enough about changing the way we're governed. His huge majority has given him the freedom to do more or less what he likes. But the fact that so few people bother to vote at all will increase the pressure to deliver impressive results. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Let's get more now from Downing Street. Our correspondent, John Sopel, has been guiding us through the last 4 weeks of campaign. He's outside number 10. John, there was all this concern earlier on during the campaign about a landslide. What's the mood, do you think, now within the Labour Party?
I think there'll be a feeling of vindication. I think there's a sense of urgency that they have to get on. And I think, as John Pienaar was reporting there, a real sense that they have to deliver. But what Tony Blair said throughout the campaign, his argument, if you like, with the British people was, look, I want you to tell me that I have a mandate to make these reforms. And so we may see it in the cabinet reshuffle, but it will be much more cast in his own image, and also in the fights that he's going to have with some of the public services if he is going to bring around these radical reforms. Because if in 4 years' time or 5 years' time we're standing in this position and he hasn't changed the health service, he hasn't changed our schools, then he will have real problems facing the electorate.
What's the ups and downs of this campaign closer than most people? What do you think the future is now for the Tories?
Very difficult. I don't think they anticipated that it would be as bad as this. I suppose the nearest analogy you could make is that they are where Labour were in 1983 when they were obsessed by CND and got hammered in that election. Well, the Tories have shown themselves to be obsessed by Europe, but it doesn't seem to have done them any good. And the quick question is, will the party change itself enough so that figures like Kenneth Clarke, who have been on the sidelines the past 2 years, can feel confident enough that they can play a role again? As to the leadership, I think that is wide open at this stage.
John, thank you for that, and thank you also for the last 4 weeks. Well, that's all from the 1 o'clock news on the day that Labour won an historic second term in office with another massive landslide. Tony Blair called the result a mandate to reform, but also an instruction from the British people to deliver. Mr. Blair returned to Downing Street, where he greeted supporters and then posed for a family photo outside number 10 with baby Leo. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. I think the weather's going to remain pretty unsettled in the next few days. That means showers around from time to time. A subtle change though. At the moment we have the high pressure to the west of us, the low pressure to the east, and these fairly cool northwesterly winds. But the pressure very slowly rises across the country as we head into next week. But having said that, what we end up is called a col. That's an area between two low pressures, two high pressures, and in those you're quite capable of getting some pretty heavy showers from time to time as well. And on the theme of showers, that's the way it is over central and northern parts of Europe if you're off for the weekend. Certainly pretty unsettled and cool there. The Mediterranean faring a lot better though, with some sunshine. Now last night it was jolly cold right across the whole country. In Anachmore the temperature fell to -4, and we even saw some frost further south as well. That's because the showers faded away yesterday evening, left clear skies in many places. The showers kept going in the northeast. And during this morning, those shower clouds have developed again, and once more we're finding a good peppering of those showers. And that's the way it's going to be into the afternoon. A good scattering of showers in many places, one or two quite heavy ones as well. They will tend to fade away, I think, in the late afternoon in many parts of at least England and Wales. But across Western and Scotland and Northern Ireland, the showers being replaced by some more general cloud and outbreaks of rain, and a fairly cool afternoon too, but perhaps not quite as windy as it was yesterday, so maybe feeling just a shade warmer providing you're away from those showers. And despite the showery weather, the pollen index still pretty high, at least in the south. Now during this evening and tonight, this area of low pressure will continue to dive southwards, bringing rain to Scotland, Northern Ireland, eventually into northern parts of England and Wales. Further south, reasonably clear skies, but it probably will tend to cloud over a bit later on, so I don't think we're seeing temperatures dipping quite as low as it did this morning, but a chilly night nevertheless. And then tomorrow we're going to find those outbreaks of rain continuing to work southwards, one or two fairly heavy bursts of rain too. To begin with, in the south it'll probably be dry and bright, and somewhat brighter weather will follow into the north during the course of the day too, but even in that brighter weather there still will be a scattering of showers, and showers really sets the scene for the foreseeable future, because even on Sunday, especially in central and eastern areas, there will be a fair number of them around, some of them quite heavy too, with hail and thunder. Best chance of staying dry and bright is going to be in the west, and in fact in the west on Monday too, a reasonable amount of sunshine, still some showers in central and eastern areas, and still those temperatures below the average.
9:02, April 19th, 1995. 9:03, the Oklahoma bomb killed 168 people.
Another 2 or 3 seconds, she would have been okay.
A Gulf War veteran was convicted.
I couldn't accept that he would have anything to do with this.
I knew he was guilty. On Monday, Timothy McVeigh is due to be executed.
I don't want to see another father lose a child.
The BBC asks, will justice have been done?
I still see it all. It doesn't go away.
The Oklahoma bomber, Monday at 9 on BBC One.
Year 1942. Objective, defeating the Nazis. Mission controller, Roosevelt. Fixer, Churchill. There can be no peace without sacrifice. This time, it's de Gaulle. The stage is set for a walk with the devil. The Tangled Alliance continues. Allies at War, Tuesday at 9 on BBC Two.
This is BBC One Scotland. Now we're reporting Scotland with Sally Magnusson.
The headlines this lunchtime. The Scottish Tory chairman steps down after another dismal showing for the party north of the border. Labour celebrate a resounding victory, holding on to all their Scottish seats. But was apathy the real winner this general election as turnout plummets? Good afternoon. The chairman of the Scottish Conservatives has resigned after another dismal night for his party. By contrast, the Scottish Labour Party won a resounding victory in the first general election since devolution. It held on to all its Scottish seats. The Conservatives managed to claw back just one seat from their 1997 wipeout here. It was an equally disappointing night for the SNP, who lost a seat to the Tories and saw their share of the vote drop by 2 points. But the real winner on the night was arguably the Apathy Party, as turnout plummeted. Only 58% of Scots voted, down more than 13% compared to the last election. The political map was completed today with the last two results in Scotland. The Lib Dems have held on to Orkney and Shetland, although their share of the vote there dropped by nearly 11% in Jim Wallace's former seat. And they also hung on to Argyll and Bute. So, after the results, the postmortems.
As you were, as Labour parades 56 Scottish MPs, a big contribution to Tony Blair's sustained majority. While things stay the same for Labour, Helen Niddle thinks other parties have faced damaging changes.
We saw off all our challengers and in the process won a historic second term. First time in a century of our history that we've been able to do that. Also very interesting that we see the collapse of the Tory vote and what is really a pretty humiliating outturn for the Scottish Nationalists as well.
For the SNP, certainly a disappointing night. Their vote fell and they lost Galloway to the Tories. But their leader insists they will come back fighting at the next elections to the Scottish Parliament.
Many pundits and many commentators said that the SNP would be irrelevant to this Westminster election campaign. And what has happened is that the SNP has established itself as the second party in popular vote in Scotland.
The Scottish Tory chairman, Raymond Robertson, will join William Hague in resigning his post. The Tories failed to make headway in key target seats, with the psychologically crucial exception of Galloway. The Tories will plainly have to rethink, but not say their leaders too drastically.
To my mind, this idea of breakaway is a complete nonsense. We will now be conducting that review. It will be taken forward by the Scottish executive of the party, and all the party will be involved in it. I stress, all the party will be involved in it.
The Liberal Democrats were celebrating. Their vote went up across Scotland and the rest of Britain. Reward for a good campaign by Jim Wallace and Charles Kennedy. The only disappointment, they failed to make any Scottish gains.
The Scottish Liberal Democrats are the only party in Scotland of the four main parties that has seen our share of the vote go up. And not just our share of the vote, but on a falling turnout, our actual numerical vote has gone up too.
The other big story of the night, voter apathy. The lowest turnout since the First World War.
I don't know if people believe what they say anyway, so it doesn't matter who's in.
No, I don't care at all. I think everybody's just going to take their money off us anyway.
I think it depends on your perspective, whether it's apathy or whether it's contentment.
Alan Reid has been duly elected to serve in Parliament as a member for the Argyll and Bute constituency.
Within the last hour, Scotland's final result, as Argyll and Bute declared. The Lib Dems held on to win with a new candidate, Alan Reid, but were heavily squeezed by Labour, while the SNP slipped back to fourth place.
After the election count, Scotland's political map has been only slightly redrawn. Just one seat changed hands on a night of mixed fortunes for the main parties.
Gordon Brown was among the first to toast Labour's success. Despite a low turnout, Labour seats were held across the country with solid majorities. In the marginal Eastwood seat, Labour's majority over the Tories increased to more than 9,000.
Jim Murphy, 23,036.
The Scottish Tory party chairman, Raymond Robertson, failing to capture what was once the safest Tory seat in Scotland. In Ayr, another marginal seat the Tories had hoped to win, their candidate Phil Galley was held off by Labour.
Sandra Osborne, Scottish Labour Party candidate, 16,000.
While in Perth, the SNP's Annabel Ewing held her party's seat by just 48 votes from the Tories. But in Galloway and Upper Nithsdale, it was the Conservatives who ousted the Nationalists by 74 votes.
Peter John Duncan, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party candidate, 12,222.
In another key marginal, the man who led the Scottish Tory election campaign, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, failed to win back Edinburgh Pentlands. The Liberal Democrat leader, Charles Kennedy, delighted with his party's showing, holding seats, increasing vote share. The Scottish Socialists fell short of their 100,000 vote target. It was Labour's night. The party's leading light, Helen Liddle, triumphantly welcomed by workers at the party's Glasgow headquarters.
This is a historic night. For the first time in a century, Labour has won a full second term.
Labour securing its dominance in Scotland. Forbes McFall, reporting Scotland.
The Scottish Conservative chairman Raymond Robertson has announced that he's standing down from his party post. At a news conference in Edinburgh this morning, the Tories said they were delighted that they'd achieved representation in Westminster again after their win in the Galloway and Upper Nithsdale constituency. But Mr Robertson, who as we saw there heavily lost the Eastwood seat he was contending, said that with a leadership election south of the border, it was an appropriate time for him to stand down.
Peter John Duncan, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party candidate.
Out of the ballot box wreckage, a sole survivor, Peter Duncan takes Galloway and Upper Nithsdale. The Tories had thrown everything they had at their key target seats and failed yet again. Sir Malcolm Rifkind losing Edinburgh Pentlands, Phil Galley losing Ayr, the party chairman, Raymond Robertson, losing Eastwood. Mr Duncan, the Tory trophy was on parade for the media today, but overall the mood was one of deep disappointment. And the shake-up has begun. Raymond Robertson is stepping down as the party chairman.
We're now going into a leadership election, and therefore I think this would be an irresponsible time for me to stand down immediately. But our new leader will want to meet with the elected members of the Scottish Executive as soon as we have a new leader to appoint a new chairman. That chairman will not be me.
How all this reads for the future of the Tory party in Scotland and how it will now reform internally promises further intriguing headlines. But the psychological boost of taking even one seat and the latest news that William Hague is resigning the leadership may well prevent the vicious extremes of the bloodletting and backstabbing which followed the '97 wipeout.
As we look towards the future, the big asset that we have is David McLetchie, and David McLetchie is a card we have to play. He is someone who is identifiably, visibly part of the new world of the Scottish Tories in the Scottish Parliament.
The Tories here had hoped to exercise the '97 result by securing a clutch of Westminster seats from which to rebuild in Scotland. That failure and the humiliation yet again of their most prominent politicians leaves them struggling to redefine their relevance to a Scottish electorate. Isabel Fraser, reporting Scotland.
Well, not a good night for the Conservatives in Scotland. We're joined now from Edinburgh by their new and only MP, Peter Duncan. Congratulations on your victory last night, Mr Duncan. I take it I'm now addressing the new Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland.
Thank you very much. I think let's take one stage at a time. I've just got one new job before I start applying for any others.
Well, it's a lonely place to be, the one Tory MP in Scotland, getting lonelier all the time. You've lost a leader this morning and a party chairman in Scotland. Was that a correct move, do you think, of Raymond Robertson's to stand down at this stage?
Well, I think let's focus on what we were trying to achieve in this election. We felt it was important that the people of Galloway and Upper Nithsdale achieved a Conservative representative. We've done that. We felt it was important that the Scottish Conservatives had a new voice in Westminster. We have achieved that.
But yes, was it right for Raymond Robertson to go?
Raymond has to make his own decision. I'm in the aftermath, if you like, the afterglow of a wonderful victory in Galloway. I'd like to revel in that, if you like, and look forward to the future.
Well, I hate to inhibit your revelling, but what's going on now among the Tories is, of course, a very real debate as to how much autonomy from London the Tories in Scotland should have, and the position of party chairman, indeed whether there should be one, is part of that debate. What's your feeling about how the party should realign itself now?
Well, I would simply observe that I was a candidate of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, and in Galloway we overturned a significant nationalist majority and returned a Conservative and Unionist Member of Parliament. I think that tells you all perhaps we need to know about the fact that our party has an important place in the United Kingdom.
Oh, come on, one seat in Scotland.
My job was to win Galloway and Uppernithsdale. I've done that. I'm delighted I've done so, and I now want to look forward to representing the people who have elected me yesterday.
Peter Duncan, thank you for joining us. Well, listening to that is Labour's George Fowkes. A good victory for Labour, Mr. Fowkes, but the apathy, turnout.
Well, the man on...
It's hardly a mandate for you, is it?
The man on your film said, is it apathy or was it contentment? And when I went
it
round...
wasn't contentment.
Well, when I went round my own constituency, people said to me, you're a shoo-in, George. And I think a lot of people just accepted that and didn't come out to vote because they thought lots of other people were going to vote me in anyway.
Is that not an argument for PR and a more fair electoral system?
I don't think so. I mean, last night some of the pundits were blaming the government for the poor turnout. I really blame the opposition parties. In 1997, it was us that created the excitement of the election, that won that stunning victory, which we've repeated in this election. And it was really up to the other parties to challenge us. And some of the seats in Scotland, there was very little challenge put up. And it wasn't just a bad night for the Conservatives. It was a really awful night for the SNP as well. They lost Galloway and Uppernithsdale. They narrowly won just Perth. They were knocked back in many, many other seats. And we've had William Hague resign, we've had Raymond Robertson's resignation. I think John Swinney's position must be up for question now as well.
Well, I'll put that question to John Swinney in a moment, but it does suggest that people, the turnout, that people are fed up with spin in politics. They're fed up, for instance, with the Labour government playing tricks with health investment money so that the same money is counted 3 times.
They don't do that.
They're cynical about the whole process.
I think they're cynical about commentators always talking about spin and making this into the story.
You're saying you're not a party that's been obsessed by spin?
I don't think so. I mean, we've now got a mandate from the people, but we've also got an instruction from the people. And I think with some humility, we'll accept that instruction and we'll improve the health service, get a 21st century health service, get a modern education system, build on what we've already done, and also work towards full employment, ending child poverty. And we've got that determination, and we'll do it, and we'll say it honestly and openly and straightforwardly.
George Fowkes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, it wasn't a good night for the Tories, but not a great night either for the SNP, with Peter Duncan, as we've heard, snatching their Galloway and Uppernithsdale seat. Their share of the vote also fell. The SNP leader, John Swinney, joins me from their headquarters in Edinburgh. I think Mr. Fowkes was suggesting that you've had such a bad night that you should resign.
On this planet that I will take advice from is George Fowkes. I'm very proud of the SNP campaign. We put forward a strong message that only SNP MPs will stand for Scotland. We've got 5 excellent MPs who will do that after this election, and we'll go on now to concentrate on preparing to win political leadership.
Yeah, but come off it, you've got one fewer MP than you had, and your share of the vote is down all over the place, especially in the marginals where you really thought that you would do well.
Well, I've been quite candid this morning. I'm disappointed that we lost the Galloway constituency, but we only lost it by 74 votes. If we'd had another 1,000 votes cast a different way in Scotland, we'd had 7 MPs rather than 5. Now, that's the democratic system. What we're determined to do, and what we achieved last night, is to confirm the SNP's position as the principal opposition party in Scotland, in second place, challenging for first place. And one of the challenges that we had to overcome in this election campaign was the argument of our opponents and the pundits that we were somehow irrelevant to this election. We've shown we're relevant because we were the runners-up in this election.
I wonder, though, whether it wouldn't help the general disaffection with politics if just every now and then people like you actually said, well, actually, it wasn't a great night for us. We didn't do very well, instead of always putting a positive spin on it.
I've just told you I was disappointed we didn't win the Galloway constituency. I don't think I could be any more open about that. I'm very sorry. We had a super candidate, Malcolm Fleming. He had an excellent team. They worked very, very hard, and I'm sorry there just wasn't enough support for them on the day to win the constituency. So I can't be more candid than that. But what I'm concentrating on, and what I'm going to set my party on a direction to do, is to win the 2003 elections, when it's quite clear from opinion polls, in a Scottish parliamentary context, the SNP and the Labour Party are absolutely neck and neck, and that's what I'm going to focus the SNP on in the months and the years to come.
John Swinney, thank you very much indeed. Well, our political editor Brian Taylor joins me now. Brian, we haven't mentioned the Lib Dems. They've held their position despite fears that their coalition with Labour might inhibit their vote in Scotland.
An extremely good result for the Liberal Democrats. Aberdeen South, a disappointment. They'd hoped to squeeze the Conservative vote sufficiently to take that seat from Labour, but nonetheless across Scotland and indeed across the UK, where they've also made gains, a good result for the Lib Dems, a reward really for a very well run campaign.
So how much has really changed in the Scottish political landscape?
Very little of course has changed, only one seat has changed, and I think I agree with John Swinney there that there are no pointers from this really to the 2003 Holyrood elections either. It is a poor night for the SNP. There is no getting away from that. It is a bad result for them. I think that perhaps we're seeing Scotland was first down the road of tactical voting. Scotland may also be first down the road of what the Americans call ticket splitting, whereby the SNP vote is declining at Westminster but may still be buoyed up for Holyrood. With regard to the Conservatives, it is a poor night for them, but the psychological boost of gaining a seat probably prevents any of the more vicious outbreak of internecine warfare.
But is there a genuine and fruitful debate going to happen now about whether the party in Scotland?
I think it's absolutely obvious what will happen to the party in Scotland. Raymond Robertson goes. The post of chairman will shrink in importance. David McCletchie's position as a counterbalance to that will be increased. They will follow, if you like, the Liberal Democrats down the road of a quasi-federal system where the leader of the party in Scotland, one leader, not at the present moment as they have, a pile of leaders confusing the electorate. One leader, and that'll be David McCletchie.
Brian Taylor, thank you very much. Let's take now a look at the weather before we go this afternoon. And this afternoon, most areas will have sunny periods and a few scattered showers. For the northeast, the showers will be more frequent with the odd heavy burst. And in the northwest, it will turn more cloudy. It'll feel cool in the northwesterly breeze with a top temperature of 15 Celsius, 59 Fahrenheit. This evening, cloud and patchy rain will spread south and eastwards across Scotland. For the Northern Isles, however, it'll be clearer and cooler. Tonight's minimum temperature will be 5 Celsius. That's all for now. We'll have an update of the news over in BBC 2 Scotland at 3:30. But for now, very good afternoon to you.